Etymology and historical origin of the baby name James. James is ultimately derived from the ancient Hebrew Yaakov, which is the origin of the name Jacob, traditionally thought to be derived from the word akev, which literally translates to at the heel. In Genesis 25 verse 26, Jacob was born the younger twin to Isaac and Rebekah, and he came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. The Lord told Rebekah that the younger would be stronger, and that the older would serve the younger. As the biblical story progresses, the cunning Jacob eventually supplants his older brother by stealing his birthright and his father's blessing. Is he not rightly named Jacob? Esau asks in Genesis 27 verse 36. For he has supplanted me these 2 times. Therefore, the name Jacob is also associated with the verb to supplant. The Greek form of the name Jacob, Iakobos, was given to the Latin, Iacomus, which eventually got anglicized to James. Sounds strange, but this is how languages mutated over time and geographical space. Historically, it was thought that James and Jacob were 2 distinct names, but most etymologists would now agree James came from Jacob, even though the New Testament features 2 disciples of Christ with the name James. The name became popularized in England and adopted by royals in the 15th century onward. James is a persistent favorite among all English-speaking nations. In 2009, the name ranked number 3 in Scotland, number 5 in Ireland, number 9 in England, number 11 in Australia, and number 17 in Canada. In 2010, James was the 19th most popular name for boys in the United States. Personality of the boy named James. The 3 energy is powerful and enthusiastic. These personalities are cheerful, full of self-expression, and often quite emotional. They have an artistic flair and gift of gab that makes them natural entertainers. Their joyfulness bubbles over, and their infectious exuberance draws a crowd. The 3 personality is like a child, forever young and full of delight. They are charming, witty, and generally happy people. The 3 personality lives in the now and has a spontaneous nature. 3 seem to live with a bright and seemingly unbreakable aura that attracts others to them. In turn, they are deeply loyal and loving to their friends and family. Luck also has a tendency to favor number 3s. Popularity of the boy named James. A perennial favorite, the name James has maintained a high position on the U.S. popularity charts for well over a century. It has never left the top 20 list of most favored boys' names. In fact, throughout the 1940s, James held the number 1 position for 13 straight years. Right now, at position number 19, James is experiencing its lowest spot on the charts in the history of name tracking. It's clear why the name has sustained such an illustrious career. It has just about everything going for it. James is a classic, but never sounds old-fashioned or outdated. James has an aristocratic, royal essence, but never sounds pretentious. James has been bestowed upon little boys consistently for centuries, but never feels overused. The name is extremely flexible by nature. It goes beautifully with almost any conceivable surname. It can be shortened easily to initials when paired with middle names, such as JR, JJ, JP. It has many pet forms: Jim, Jimmy, Jamie. And if that isn't enough, the name's counterparts in other languages are just as classic: Jacob in Hebrew, Seamus in Ireland, Jacques in French, Jamie in Spanish, and Giacomo in Italian. We would almost call James the perfect name. Quick facts on James. Gender, boy. Origin, English. Number of syllables, 1. Ranking popularity, 13. Pronunciation, James. Simple meaning, at the heel, the supplanter. Characteristics of James. Social, dramatic, popular, happy, communicative, optimistic, creative. Cultural references to the baby name, James. Literary characters of the baby name James. Having done the longest day in literature with his monumental Ulysses, James Joyce set himself even greater challenges for his next book, The Night. A nocturnal state, that is what I want to convey, what goes on in a dream, during a dream. The work, which would exhaust 2 decades of his life and the odd resources of some 60 languages, culminated in the 1939 publication of Joyce's final and most revolutionary masterpiece, Finnegan's Wake. A story with no real beginning or end, it ends in the middle of a sentence and begins in the middle of the same sentence. This Book of Dublin's Jeanne is as remarkable for its prose as for its circular structure. Written in a fantastic dream language, forged from polyglot puns and portmanteau words, The Wake features some of Joyce's most brilliant and inventive work. More than 60 years after its original publication, it remains, in Anthony Burgess's words, a great comic vision, one of the few books of the world that can make us laugh aloud on nearly every page. Popular songs on James. James Dean, Dear James, a song by Woody Guthrie. Tad Loves Kimberly James, a song by Harvey Danger, a song by Cher, a song by Billy Joel. Cool James, Little James, a great little tune by James Taylor, a song by Warren Zevon, a song by Kansas, a song by Kenny Rogers, a song by Women in Docks, a song by James Taylor, Just Like Jesse James, Frank and Jesse James, Sinking of the Reuben James, a song by the Beastie Boys, a song by Bruce Springsteen, Sinking of Reuben James, a song by the Eagles, a song by the Kingston Trio, Sweet Baby James, Reuben James, a song by Oasis, Bells of St. James, Little David, James Taylor, James, Jesse James, a song by Kingston Trio, a song by Sonic Youth, Jimmy James, a song by Action Slacks, Brother James. Famous people named James. James Garfield, U.S. President, James Lofton, football player, James Polk, U.S. President, James Dean, actor, James Cagney, actor, James Caviezel, actor, James Madison, U.S. President, James Woods, actor, James Coburn, actor, James Garner, actor, James Earl Carter, U.S. President, James Earl Jones, actor, James M. Barrie, author of Peter Pan, James Spader, actor, James Taylor, musician, James Buchanan, U.S. President, James Blunt, singer, James Belushi, actor/comic, James Gandolfini, actor, James Braid, golfer, James Van Der Beek, actor, James Monroe, U.S. President, James Worthy, basketball player, James Caan, actor, James Sutherland, hockey. Children of famous people named James. Reese Witherspoon. Historic figures with the name James. No wonder the Scots love the name James. It was borne by several Scottish kings, covering over 2 centuries. Here is a brief history of the Scottish kings named James. When the great Robert the Bruce failed to produce a male heir, the throne was passed to his grandson in the female line, Robert Stuart, son of his daughter, Marjorie, and thus began the House of Stuart in the illustrious history of the Scottish and British monarchy. Robert II's grandson, James I, 1406 to 1437, was to prove one of Scotland's ablest kings. He was Robert III's younger son. His older son David died suspiciously, so the younger son James was sent to France for his safety. Upon his return to take the throne, he was captured, imprisoned and held for ransom for 18 years. The ransom was eventually paid by Scotland, so James I came back to asset his authority, along with his new English bride. He centralized control of the Scottish crown, but was ultimately assassinated for the bad publicity that came along with that accomplishment. His son James II continued his father's policy of weakening the great noble families to bring more power to the House of Stuart. His son, James III, was responsible for the last great acquisition of Scottish territory through his marriage to a Dane. Her dowry included the Orkney Islands and the Shetland Islands. With his death came his son and successor, James IV, who was notable for ending the quasi-independent rule of the Lord of the Isles, bringing the Western Isles under effective royal control for the first time. He is also remembered for marrying King Henry VII's daughter, Margaret Tudor, thus laying the foundation for the 17th-century union of the crowns. James IV's reign was during the European Renaissance, a time when Scottish culture blossomed along with the spread of education and the founding of St. Andrews University. James IV died in battle when they invaded England in support of the French in 1512. Regents once again controlled the Scottish government in the name of his son, the infant James V. James V would eventually escape the custody of the regents and go about his father's work of subduing the rebellious Highlands, Western and Northern Isles. James V had a fairly successful reign but died shortly after another devastating campaign against England. Just before his death, the Scottish king learned of the birth of his only heir by his French noblewoman wife, a daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots. He apparently remarked, "A Euroid cam while lass, it will gang while lass," referring to the House of Stuart, which began with Walter Stuart's marriage to the daughter of Robert the Bruce. Since Mary is a baby, the rule goes back to the regents. While Mary is still a toddler, King Henry VIII attempts to use military force to ensure Mary marries his son, Edward. So Mary is sent to France by her French mother in the hopes that she will marry the heir to the French throne. Her mother, Marie de Guise, stays behind in Scotland to look after her daughter's interests. Finally, in 1550, England withdrew from Scotland completely and Marie assumes the regency, continuing to advance French interests in Scotland and keep Marie's interests intact. In 1560 Marie died, but the Treaty of Edinburgh was signed, providing for the removal of French and English troops from Scotland. The Scottish Reformation took place only days later when the Scottish Parliament abolished the Roman Catholic religion and outlawed the Mass. Meanwhile, Queen Mary had been raised a Catholic in France. As planned, she married the Dauphin Francis in 1558, and became Queen of France on the death of his father the following year. When her husband died, Mary, now at the ripe old age of 19, decided to return to Scotland to assume her authority in a hostile atmosphere. Despite being Catholic herself, she refrained from imposing Catholicism on her largely Protestant subjects, thus straining relations with the chief Catholic nobles. Her reign was riddled with crisis, rivalries, the murder of her secretary, the murder of her second husband, and her abdication. She was eventually imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle, during which time her infant son James VI would ascend to the throne. Mary eventually escaped from Loch Leven, and brashly attempted to regain the throne by force. Don't you just love Sagittarian women? In Scotland, the regents fought a civil war on behalf of James VI against his mother's supporters. Talk about dysfunctional families. Meanwhile, back in England Mary became a symbol of Catholic dissension and was eventually tried for treason and beheaded on the orders of her cousin Elizabeth I. So how James VI became King of Scotland, eventually James I of England, more on that above. After that, Elizabeth I essentially hands him all of England, and the monarchy is unified. James II of England was the grandson of James I, the son of Charles I and the brother of Charles II, see the name Charles for more information on their reigns. In a nutshell, Charles I inherited the throne from James I, and was eventually executed after Oliver Cromwell became a Lord Protector of England and stamped out the monarchy for 11 years. After Cromwell's death, Charles I's son, Charles II, would return from European exile to re-establish the monarchy with the support of the English people. Charles II became known as the Euromary monarch due to his pursuits of pleasure. He was also a closeted Catholic, and converted to Catholicism on his deathbed, but he also knew how to play politics and keep the peace. His brother, the openly Catholic James II, would ascend the throne much to the chagrin of Parliament and the English people who predominantly did not want to return to Catholicism. So James II was immediately faced with overthrow attempts, and his overzealous defense did nothing to gain further support. Fortunately, for his detractors, James I's first wife was Protestant, so his Protestant daughter Mary was recognized as the preferred heir along with her also Protestant Dutch husband, William of Orange. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 ensued and James II was forced to abdicate or lose his life. His reign lasted a little more than 3 years. James Macpherson is often referred to as the Scottish Robin Hood and famous for his fiddle tune A Euro e Macphersona Euro S Ronta Euro he played in the gallows awaiting his execution, later rewritten by the Scottish poet Robert Burns. He was born the illegitimate son to a Scottish lord and a beautiful Scottish tinker, the equivalent of a gypsy woman. The lord took him into his house and provided for him until he died, upon which time the child James was returned to his mother. He became a pirate of sorts, but never perpetrated a crime on the vulnerable or distressed, hence, his Robin Hood association, rob from the rich, give to the poor. A posse of rich lords and farmers eventually captured him and he was sentenced to death. His famous A Euro or Anta Euro sings in part, A Euro each. Little did my mother think when first she cradled me that I would turn a roving boy and die on the gallows tree. A Euro sae rantingly, sae wantonly, sae dauntingly geed he played a tune, and danked it rune and they hanged him from a tree. A Euro, when Queen Elizabeth I of England died in 1603, she had one last trick up her sleeve. She bequeathed the throne to her first cousin once removed, James VI of Scotland, who also happened to be the son of Elizabeth Euro's nuisance of a cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. This also transferred the royal power from the House of Tudor to the House of Stuart. James I's reign is notable for a few things. First of all, he felt it was his a Euro et divini Euro right to rule with absolute power and therefore basically ignored Parliament until he needed them to help support his lavish lifestyle. Secondly, he didn't quite know how to placate the religious issues pervasive throughout England. Elizabeth I had reinstated the Church of England to the Protestant faith, and yet all of Europe was predominantly Catholic, so were many of the English for that matter. Complicating matters, the Puritans were an ever-growing sect of the Protestants and were demanding the eradication of all remnants of Catholic practices still permeating the church services. James basically told the Puritans to get lost, and they did, by sailing to America on the Mayflower in 1620. Despite his lack of diplomacy and insensitivities to religious matters, the publication of the King James Version of the Bible in 1611 was met with extensive approval. Another piece of history important to know about James I is that he was the ruling king when Guy Fawkes attempted to blow up Parliament and the king, intending to a Euro oblo the Scots back to Scotland. A Euro that effort failed, but the British still a Euro or remember the 5th of November, a Euro, 1605 that is. James I died at the age of 58, and despite his relatively lackluster reign, he still had the affection of the people. His son, Charles I would inherit the throne. Yes, we know that Madison is his last name, but we wanted to throw him in here given his obvious influence on the popularity of the name Madison as a given name in America. James Madison was one of our founding fathers, a Congress member, the Secretary of State under Jefferson and finally the 4th President of the United States. He had a shy, reserved personality, but also a body sense of humor. He is known for being on the winning side of almost all political arguments, given his keen intellect and his thorough preparedness. His presidency is probably most defined by the War of 1812 against the British. The war begins badly. The United States had 20 ships to Britannia Euro S-1000. Just as America is about to lose, General Andrew Jackson leads his ragtag army to victory in the Battle of New Orleans. Madison is also known for his vivacious, popular wife, Dolly Madison. Jimi Hendrix was one of the most important and influential popular musicians of the 20th century, who crammed a great deal of living into his, almost, 28 years. Skyrocketing to fame after appearing at the 1967 Monterey Pop Festival, we went on to headline at Woodstock in 1969 and the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. He is credited with popularizing the use of the wah-wah pedal and stereophonic effects in recordings, as well as highly amplified feedback. He received numerous music awards, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame posthumously, and was named by Rolling Stone as a Euro's greatest guitarist of all time. Euro. Jimi Hendrix died a drug-related death in London. He is buried in Seattle. The famous outlaw Jesse James was born Jesse Woodson James in Missouri to a Baptist minister. During the Civil War, James left Missouri to fight as a Confederate guerrilla and once killed 8 men in a single day. After the war, he returned to Missouri and became the leader of one of history's most notorious outlaw gangs. With his brother Frank James and several other ex-Confederates, including Cole Younger and his brothers, the James gang robbed their way across the western frontier, targeting banks, trains, stagecoaches, and stores from Iowa to Texas. Eluding lawmen, the gang escaped with thousands of dollars. James is believed to have carried out the first daylight bank robbery in peacetime, stealing $0,000 from a bank in Liberty, Missouri. In 1873, the gang pulled off the first successful train robbery in the American West. Despite their criminal and often violent acts, James and his partners were much adored. Journalists, eager to entertain Easterners with tales of a Wild West, exaggerated and romanticized the gang's heists, often casting James as a contemporary Robin Hood. His humanitarian acts were probably more fiction than fact. In 1876 in Northfield, Missouri, all the gang members were either killed or captured after a botched bank robbery attempt. All but Jesse and his brother, that is. The James Minaeuro's wives tried to get them to take on a normal life, but with bounties on their head, they had no choice but to hide out. He eventually recruited the Ford brothers for another heist, but was double-crossed when Robert Ford, hoping to claim the $0,000 reward on Jesse, shot and killed him. Jesse Jamisa's mother provided his epitaph, "A in loving memory of my beloved son, murdered by a traitor and coward whose name is not worthy to appear here." 6 presidents of the United States bore the name James. The 4th President of the U.S. was James Madison, 1809 to 1817, known as His Little Majesty, as he was the shortest of all U.S. presidents, standing at 5'6" tall. James Madison was one of the fathers of the Constitution and a brilliant, well-prepared politician. His presidency was defined by 2 things: the War of 1812 and the popularity of his wife, Dolly Madison. Next came the 5th U.S. President, James Monroe, 1817 to 1825. He was known as the Era of Good Feelings President because of his falsely easy presidency. He was noted for the Missouri Compromise, which allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state, even though he had made efforts to send slaves back to Africa, think Monrovia, and the Monroe Doctrine, which rejected European attempts to colonize the Western Hemisphere. The 11th U.S. President was James Polk, 1845 to 1849, who is sometimes referred to as the hardest-working president in history. Also referred to as Polk the Plotter, the man set an agenda and made it happen. He secured the Oregon Territory by threatening war with England, he brought California into statehood, he lowered tariffs, he established an independent treasury, and he went to war with Mexico to settle the Texas dispute. All of this in 4 years, and did not seek re-election. Unfortunately, he would die 3 months after his term ended. The 15th U.S. President, James Buchanan, 1857 to 1861, was called 10-Cent Jimmy for his insensitive comment that 10 cents a day was plenty for folks to live on. This James is usually ranked at the bottom of all presidents and was thankfully followed by Abraham Lincoln, to whom he said, "If you are as happy to be coming into the office of the presidency as I am to leave it, then you are a very happy man." James Garfield, 1881 to 1881, was the country's 20th president, whose presidency only lasted 200 days before being assassinated by a crazy man. Had Garfield served his term, historians speculate that he would have been determined to move towards civil service reform and carry on in the clean government tradition of President Hayes. He also supported education for Black Southerners and called for African American suffrage. Lastly, there was Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. President, 1977 to 1981, who unfortunately inherited a White House riddled with problems after the Nixon/Ford debacles during a problematic time in U.S. history. While all historians agree that Carter was a president of great intellect, He was eventually referred to as President Malaise due to his Euroecrasis of confidential Euro speech and the appearance that he did not have the White House under control. He is probably better known and respected for his accomplishments post-presidency.